The year was 1943. Deep in the vast, endless waters of the Pacific, Japanese submarine crews prepared for missions that could decide the fate of an empire. They were trained in silence, patience, and deadly precision. Each officer, each sailor, believed that beneath the waves, they held the power to strike fear into the Allies' supply lines. For them, the ocean was not just water, it was territory. A kingdom they ruled with cunning and steel. Lieutenant Commander Hiroshi Tanaka stood on the bridge of I-27, feeling the vibration of the diesel engines beneath his feet. The early morning sun glinted off the water, a calm that belied the violence waiting below. His crew moved like shadows, each knowing their role to perfection. The helmsman adjusting the rudder, the sonar operator listening intently, the torpedo team readying weapons with a reverent precision. For months, the Japanese Navy had relied on tactics refined over decades, honed in wars past and in peacetime exercises. The ocean was their ally. It hid them from the enemy's eyes, muffled their movements, and gave them a sense of invincibility. They had stalked American convoys before, and many times the results had been devastating. Supplies sank into the depths, and the U.S. Navy struggled to respond. But now, something was changing. Rumors had begun circulating among the fleet. New American devices floating just below the surface, designed to listen to submarines. At first, many dismissed it as exaggeration. No technology could pierce the Pacific's vast silence, they thought. Yet the whispers persisted, and the higher-ups ordered patrols to remain vigilant. On board I-27, Tanaka felt a thrill of anticipation. Their orders were simple: intercept enemy supply lines near the Solomon Islands and report back. The mission promised danger, yes, but also glory. He glanced at his men, their faces a mix of excitement and steely determination. Among them was Seiji Nakamura, a young sonar operator whose hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the delicate dials of the listening equipment. He had grown up hearing tales of legendary submarine captains, and now he was part of that lineage. As the submarines slipped beneath the waves, the Pacific enveloped them. Silence dominated, punctuated only by the hum of machinery and the occasional creak of the hull under pressure. The crew communicated in whispers and hand signals, every sound minimized. Here, in the depth, they were kings, and yet unknown to them. The Americans were preparing a new game, one that would turn the ocean itself against its masters. Sonar buoys, drifting silently on the currents, were being deployed. These were no ordinary obstacles. They were the eyes and ears of a foe who refused to be unseen. They could detect the faintest vibration, the smallest echo, the tiniest movement. Of metal in the water. At first, the Japanese crews did not notice. Their confidence remained unshaken. But the stage was being set. The Pacific, once a sanctuary, was about to become a battlefield where invisibility was no longer guaranteed. Tanaka did not yet know it, but the silent hunters were about to become the hunted. Days passed quietly, almost deceptively so. Lieutenant Commander Tanaka and his crew prowled the waters near the Solomon Islands, scanning for American supply convoys. The ocean seemed familiar, almost friendly, as if it were the same realm they had dominated for years. But beneath its surface, invisible watchers were stirring. Seiji Nakamura was the first to notice something strange. The sonar readings were irregular. At first, he thought it was a school of fish, or perhaps distant engine noise from a passing ship. But as he listened, adjusting the delicate dials, a chilling realization set in. There were patterns, subtle, mechanical, and unmistakable. Something was out there, something that wasn't human, yet it was tracking them. "Sir," Nakamura whispered, barely audible over the hum of the submarine's machinery. "There, something in the water. I can't explain it. It's listening." Tanaka frowned, leaning over the console. The readings were faint, almost ghostly, but they were real. Sonar buoys? He murmured, recalling the rumors from command. Impossible. The Pacific is too vast, but the evidence was undeniable. The subtle clicks, the faint echoing signals, these were not natural. The Americans had deployed floating listening devices, drifting silently on the currents, transmitting every vibration back to unseen operators. The ocean was no longer just water. It was a monitored battlefield. The crew's initial disbelief quickly gave way to unease. Every movement of the submarine felt scrutinized. The once confident helmsman now hesitated before turning, aware that the smallest change could betray their position. Even routine operations became tense rituals, conducted with almost religious care to avoid detection. Days turned into nights filled with anxiety. Subtle alarms, barely perceptible through the sonar equipment, kept the crew awake. Shadows seemed to move outside the hull, phantom threats in the murky depths. Each sonar ping from the Americans was a whisper of warning, a reminder that they were no longer masters of the sea. A convoy appeared on the horizon, and the crew prepared to strike. Torpedoes were loaded, angles calculated, and plans whispered through the corridors. But as they maneuvered into position, an eerie realization dawned on them. Their movements were not concealed. The convoy seemed to anticipate them, adjusting course with uncanny precision. "Sir," Nakamura said again, his voice tight, "they know where we are, before we even act." Tanaka's jaw tightened. The thrill of the hunt had vanished, replaced by the cold knowledge that they were being hunted in return. The Pacific, their domain for so long, had betrayed them. The whispers of the sonar buoys had reached deep into the heart of their submarine, shattering confidence and planting a seed of fear that would only grow dot by the time the convoy had passed. Unscathed and seemingly untouchable, the crew of I-27 understood a hard truth. The ocean was no longer theirs. Every dive, every maneuver, was now a calculated risk against an invisible enemy that listened to their every move. The hunters had become the hunted, and the silent depths were filled with unseen eyes. Weeks had passed, and the unease within the crew of I-27 had grown into a constant, gnawing tension. The sonar buoys were no longer a distant rumor. They were omnipresent, drifting silently like ghosts across the vast Pacific. Every faint ping, every ripple detected by the submarine's instruments reminded them they were being watched, tracked, and hunted. Lieutenant Commander Tanaka studied the map of their patrol area, tracing the paths they had taken. Once they had moved with confidence, weaving through the currents like predators. Now each plotted course seemed dangerous, a potential trap set by unseen eyes. "It's as if the ocean itself is against us," muttered Chief Petty Officer Hiroto Sakamoto, adjusting a valve in the torpedo room. "We move, it watches. We wait, it waits." The Americans had perfected a terrifying method of anti-submarine warfare. Aircraft patrolled the skies, dropping sonar buoys in patterns designed to cover every possible route. These buoys were linked to command centers far away, transmitting data in real time. For the Japanese submariners, it was like trying to hide in plain sight while an invisible network of hunters anticipated their every move. One night, as I-27 slipped through the black waters, a series of sonar pings echoed faintly through the hull. Nakamura's hands flew across the controls, trying to interpret the pattern. "They're coordinating. Multiple buoys, triangulating our position," he said, voice tight with fear. Tanaka's face was grim. "Dive deeper. Go silent. Make no sound." The command reverberated through the metal corridors. The submarine sank into the cooler, darker depths, engines slowed, systems minimized. Yet even in this seeming refuge, the ghostly eyes of the Americans were close. The crew could hear distant explosions as other Japanese submarines were caught in ambushes. The radio crackled with sporadic reports of missing vessels. Every survivor told the same story. The ocean had turned into a labyrinth of invisible minds and listening devices, and few could navigate it unscathed. In the mess hall, sailors whispered about convoys that disappeared before torpedoes could reach them, about friends lost to sudden depth-charge attacks. The camaraderie of the crew was tinged with fear. Even the bravest men, trained for years to stalk and strike, now felt the oppressive weight of surveillance pressing from all sides. Tanaka, sitting alone in the control room, realized that traditional tactics were obsolete. The ocean's currents no longer hid their movements. The hunters had become the hunted, and every dive could be their last. He closed his eyes briefly, recalling the calm confidence of the Pacific before the Americans' invisible net. That world was gone, replaced by a new reality where stealth alone was no longer enough. By dawn, I-27 had changed course, moving cautiously along a path dictated not by strategy but by survival. The crew moved like shadows within shadows, listening for the faintest sign of the ghostly eyes above and around them. They were silent hunters no longer. They were ghosts in the deep, navigating a battlefield where the rules had changed forever. By mid-1944, the reality of the Pacific had shifted irreversibly. Japanese submarine crews no longer prowled the waters with confidence. They were navigating a hostile network that seemed to anticipate every move. Supply lines, once lifelines of the empire, were now perilous paths where the risk of discovery was nearly certain. Lieutenant Commander Tanaka's I-27 joined a patrol line near the Mariana Islands. The mission was simple: locate enemy shipping and report, perhaps strike if opportunity allowed. Yet every decision felt like threading a needle over a pit of unseen dangers. Even the currents seemed suspicious, as if carrying whispers of the American traps beneath the waves. Reports from other submarines painted a grim picture. Convoys moved unimpeded, often evading torpedo attacks with uncanny accuracy. Entire flotillas had vanished without a trace. The sonar buoys, combined with aerial reconnaissance and aggressive destroyer patrols, had created a deadly web spanning thousands of miles. The ocean was no longer neutral. It was a battlefield where the Japanese had lost command. Inside I-27, the crew felt the weight of inevitability. Each watch was long and tense, ears straining to distinguish natural sounds from artificial signals. Nakamura had grown pale, haunted by the constant pings that now seemed to follow them. "We're surrounded," he whispered one night, almost to himself. "Everywhere we turn, they're listening." Even the veteran sailors, men who had survived countless patrols, were unnerved. The silence of the deep was no longer comforting. It was a warning. One by one, the crew realized that their old tactics, silent approaches, calculated strikes, were obsolete. The ocean had become a maze of monitored corridors, and every misstep could be fatal. A brief encounter with an American convoy confirmed their fears. As I-27 maneuvered to intercept, a series of sonar pings erupted, each one precise and coordinated. Depth charges followed, shaking the submarine violently. Tanaka barked orders, his mind racing to find a path through the invisible trap. The crew clung to their stations, hearts pounding, as the ocean itself seemed to fight against them. The attack subsided, but the psychological impact lingered. Survivors of other submarines had told stories of comrades lost to sudden explosions, of entire patrols obliterated before they could even react. The crew understood now. Dominance of the sea was no longer theirs to claim. As they surfaced under the cover of night, Tanaka looked out over the moonlit water, reflecting on the empire's shrinking grip. The Pacific, once a vast domain for the proud submarine crews of Japan, was slipping away. Each patrol, each dive, was no longer an assertion of power. It was a desperate gamble for survival. The ocean had changed. The rules had changed. And the silent hunters were beginning to understand that the vast waters they once called home had become the Americans' domain, a place where every movement was observed, every strategy anticipated. By mid-1944, the reality of the Pacific had shifted irreversibly. Japanese submarine crews no longer prowled the waters with confidence. They were navigating a hostile network that seemed to anticipate every move. Supply lines, once lifelines of the empire, were now perilous paths where the risk of discovery was nearly certain. Lieutenant Commander Tanaka's I-27 joined a patrol line near the Mariana Islands. The mission was simple: locate enemy shipping and report, perhaps strike if opportunity allowed. Yet every decision felt like threading a needle over a pit of unseen dangers. Even the currents seemed suspicious, as if carrying whispers of the American traps beneath the waves. Dock reports from other submarines painted a grim picture. Convoys moved unimpeded, often evading torpedo attacks with uncanny accuracy. Entire flotillas had vanished without a trace. The sonar buoys, combined with aerial reconnaissance and aggressive destroyer patrols, had created a deadly web spanning thousands of miles. The ocean was no longer neutral. It was a battlefield where the Japanese had lost command. Inside I-27, the crew felt the weight of inevitability. Each watch was long and tense, ears straining to distinguish natural sounds from artificial signals. Nakamura had grown pale, haunted by the constant pings that now seemed to follow them. "We're surrounded," he whispered one night, almost to himself. "Everywhere we turn, they're listening." Even the veteran sailors, men who had survived countless patrols, were unnerved. The silence of the deep was no longer comforting. It was a warning. One by one, the crew realized that their old tactics, silent approaches, calculated strikes, were obsolete. The ocean had become a maze of monitored corridors, and every misstep could be fatal. A brief encounter with an American convoy confirmed their fears. As I-27 maneuvered to intercept, a series of sonar pings erupted, each one precise and coordinated. Depth charges followed, shaking the submarine violently. Tanaka barked orders, his mind racing to find a path through the invisible trap. The crew clung to their stations, hearts pounding, as the ocean itself seemed to fight against them. The attack subsided, but the psychological impact lingered. Survivors of other submarines had told stories of comrades lost to sudden explosions, of entire patrols obliterated before they could even react. The crew understood now. Dominance of the sea was no longer theirs to claim. As they surfaced under the cover of night, Tanaka looked out over the moonlit water, reflecting on the empire's shrinking grip. The Pacific, once a vast domain for the proud submarine crews of Japan, was slipping away. Each patrol, each dive, was no longer an assertion of power. It was a desperate gamble for survival. The ocean had changed. The rules had changed. And the silent hunters were beginning to understand that the vast waters they once called home had become the Americans' domain, a place where every movement was observed, every strategy anticipated. The Pacific had become an unrelenting predator, and the hunters were now prey. By late 1944, Japanese submarines faced a terrifying reality. Every dive, every patrol could be their last. Lieutenant Commander Tanaka and the crew of I-27 had grown, cautious to the point of obsession. Every decision was measured, every movement calculated against an enemy that seemed to anticipate them. One night, deep near the Philippine Sea, the sonar operator, Seiji Nakamura, detected the faintest echoes patterns unmistakably consistent with the American tracking system. "Sir, multiple contacts. Converging," he whispered, tension tightening his voice. Tanaka's hands tightened around the console. Silent running, full depth, engines at minimum. "Do not make a sound." The order was routine now, but the stakes had never been higher. The crew moved like shadows, each man performing years of training in minutes that felt like hours above. American destroyers and aircraft had detected the submarine's presence. Buoys floated silently on the surface, transmitting every vibration back to the hunter's eyes above. The ocean around I-27 was alive with invisible threats. Every ping, every echo, was a death sentence waiting to happen. The first depth charges fell. The metal hull groaned and shuddered under the force, water rushing past in violent waves. Crew members clung to consoles, praying the vessel would hold. Tanaka calculated, maneuvered, and prayed in equal measure, trying to evade the deadly pattern of the American trap. Seconds stretched into eternities. The crew heard distant explosions from other submarines, the air thick with the knowledge that survival was uncertain. Yet somehow, through skill, luck, and determination, I-27 managed to slip away from the worst of the attack. Emerging hours later, under the cover of darkness, the crew was shaken but alive. Faces were pale, voices silent. The realization was universal. Their world had changed irrevocably. The Pacific was no longer their dominion. Every familiar current, every once safe passage, was now a channel for enemy detection. The final hunt was not just a test of skill, but of endurance, courage, and nerve. Tanaka knew that the submarine would continue to patrol, but the confidence of years past had vanished. Their missions now were survival operations, conducted under the oppressive knowledge that at any moment an invisible eye could strike. For the crew, the lesson was clear. The ocean was no longer theirs. Every dive, every torpedo, every maneuver was now against an enemy who had transformed the very waters into a weapon. The hunters had been turned into ghosts, moving through a realm that had once belonged to them, but now belonged to another power entirely. By early 1945, the once proud Japanese submarine force had been humbled. The ocean that had long been their sanctuary, their hunting ground, had been transformed by American ingenuity into a vast, monitored battlefield. Sonar buoys, depth charges, and coordinated air and sea patrols had rendered stealth nearly obsolete. Lieutenant Commander Tanaka and his remaining crew returned from patrol with heavy hearts. Friends had been lost, submarines destroyed, and missions rendered futile by an enemy who had mastered the art of anticipation. The Pacific, their once invincible kingdom, was no longer theirs to command. Survivors of the submarine fleet recounted tales of ghostly contacts, silent watchers, and convoys that slipped away under the constant gaze of American technology. The pride and confidence that had defined Japanese submariners for decades was replaced by a cautious respect for a new reality. In the modern theater of war, invisibility was no longer a guarantee of survival. Tanaka reflected on the lessons learned. The ocean itself had become a weapon in the hands of an enemy willing to innovate and adapt. The technology that had first seemed improbable, the sonar buoys, linked together across vast distances, had changed the very nature of naval warfare. It was a strategic revolution, one that demonstrated the power of intelligence, coordination, and foresight. For the crew, life went on, but the experiences left indelible marks. Many men survived the war, carrying memories of tension, fear, and the constant hum of distant surveillance. Some spoke of the ocean with a quiet reverence, acknowledging that it had once been theirs, but only briefly. Others remained haunted by the friends they had lost and the sense of helplessness as technology stripped them of control. Historically, the lessons of the sonar buoys and the tracking of Japanese submarines reshaped naval strategy. The Americans had demonstrated that mastery of the ocean was no longer solely about courage or stealth. It was about information, anticipation, and relentless technological innovation. The tide had turned beneath the waves, and with it, the balance of power in the Pacific. As Tanaka looked out over the moonlit waters one final time, he understood the truth. The ocean was no longer theirs. It belonged to those who could see it track it, and adapt faster than their opponents. The silent hunters had been humbled. Their dominance ended not by direct confrontation alone, but by a subtle, relentless transformation of the battlefield itself. The Pacific had become a testament to the new age of naval warfare, a domain where invisibility was fleeting, and where the balance of power could shift not by the strength of a fleet, but by the clever placement of floating devices, the ears of an enemy, and the courage to adapt. The ocean was no longer theirs, and they would never forget the lesson. It was 1942, and the skies over Europe had become a deadly chessboard. The Luftwaffe, confident and disciplined, patrolled their territory with precision and pride. Yet even seasoned officers were aware of a formidable new threat, the American. Heavy bombers that now roamed the skies, pounding targets with unprecedented range and payload. On a clear autumn day, a single B-17 Flying Fortress had been damaged over occupied France. Rather than destroy it, the Luftwaffe saw an opportunity. A team of officers, careful, meticulous, and curious, was dispatched to recover the aircraft. They approached it with a mixture of professional duty and unspoken excitement. Capturing an enemy plane intact was rare, and the prize before them was extraordinary. Oberleutnant Friedrich Keller, a veteran bomber pilot, ran his hands over the sleek metal fuselage. "In all my years," he muttered to his comrades, "I've never seen such engineering. Every surface, every panel. It's unlike anything we have." The crew of recovered engineers and pilots inspected the aircraft, noting its reinforced hull, massive wingspan, and surprisingly complex systems. The armament alone was astounding. Multiple defensive positions, each with its own machine gun, strategically positioned to cover nearly every angle. They exchanged glances, a mixture of respect and apprehension growing in their expressions. As the plane was towed to a secure Luftwaffe airfield, whispers of amazement spread among the officers. They had captured enemy aircraft before, but none had seemed so formidable. The B-17 wasn't just a plane. It was a fortress in the sky, and it would soon reveal its full potential. Preparations began immediately for a test flight. The officers would take turns piloting the B-17, learning its controls, testing its handling, and assessing its defensive capabilities. There was excitement in the air, excitement mixed with a faint, uneasy sense that this aircraft might challenge everything they knew about aerial combat. For Friedrich Keller, stepping into the cockpit was like entering a new world. The array of instruments, the controls for each gun turret, and the sheer size of the aircraft impressed him. This was no ordinary capture. It was a revelation, a glimpse into American ingenuity and industrial power. As engines roared to life, the officers prepared to take their first flight in a plane that would forever alter their understanding of aerial defense. The sky, once familiar, was about to teach them a lesson they would never forget. The engines of the captured B-17 rumbled to life, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the airframe. Oberleutnant Friedrich Keller adjusted his headset and glanced at the co-pilot, Oberleutnant Hans Weber. Both men felt a mix of anticipation and trepidation. They were about to take to the skies in an enemy aircraft, unlike any they had seen. The takeoff was smooth, almost deceptively so. The massive bomber lifted from the runway with ease, its four engines humming in perfect harmony. Keller marveled at the stability of the plane, noting how it handled turbulence with a grace that German bombers often lacked. "Remarkable," he muttered, eyes scanning the horizon. But as the aircraft climbed into higher altitudes, the first surprises emerged. Keller had assumed that, like other bombers, the B-17's defensive firepower would be modest, a secondary concern behind its bomb load. He was wrong. From the tail turret, the dorsal guns, the waist positions, and even the chin turret, a network of defensive machine guns could cover nearly every angle. The range, coordination, and rapid-fire capability were staggering. Even with the plane empty of bombs, Keller realized that attacking it in formation would be suicide. "Have you ever seen anything like this?" whispered Weber, his voice tinged with disbelief as he peered at the controls for the multiple turrets. "We could not possibly approach this aircraft head-on without being shredded." They ran through maneuvers, testing the B-17's reactions, and the ease with which gunners could target any point in the sky. Each simulation, each mock attack, reinforced the terrifying reality. This was not just a bomber. It was a flying fortress. Keller's mind raced, recalling the air battles over Germany, where Allied bombers had inflicted devastating losses. Now he understood why. It was not only their durability, but their ability to defend themselves in coordinated, overlapping arcs of fire. The American crews had built a fortress that could protect itself against multiple attackers simultaneously. The first flight ended with a mixture of exhilaration and apprehension. The Luftwaffe officers exchanged grim looks, acknowledging what they had just discovered. The captured B-17 had revealed a chilling truth. German tactics, honed over years, were ill-prepared to handle such a machine. The sky had a new ruler, and it was armored, gunned, and unrelenting. Back on the ground, engineers and pilots debated the implications. Reports were drafted, observations recorded, and a shared understanding grew among the officers. Attacking formations of these flying fortresses would require innovation, coordination, and no small amount of luck. The war in the skies had changed forever. The B-17 climbed higher into the crisp morning sky, its silhouette imposing against the sunlit clouds. Keller gripped the control yoke, his knuckles white, as the crew prepared for the next stage of their tests. Today, they would simulate attacks on the flying fortress itself, testing its defensive systems in full operation. As the first mock attacker approached a Luftwaffe trainer plane flying in coordination, the B-17's gunners sprang into action. From tail to nose, from waist to dorsal turrets, every machine gun came alive with precise overlapping arcs of fire. Bullets tore through the sky, leaving tracers that painted a deadly lattice. Keller watched, mouth slightly agape, as the trainee aircraft maneuvered and weaved, struggling to evade the relentless defensive fire. It's impossible," he exclaimed, voice tight with awe. "Every approach is covered. There's nowhere to hide." Weber, seated beside him, nodded in silent agreement. "Even head-on, even from the flanks. Every angle has guns. Trained on it. It's like the sky itself is shooting at you." The crew rotated through all stations, testing the responsiveness of each turret. From the tail gunner's perspective, the defensive machine guns were terrifyingly effective. From the waist positions, they could target multiple attackers simultaneously, coordinating to cover blind spots seamlessly. Every angle, every potential approach was accounted for. Keller's mind raced as he tried to reconcile this revelation with their previous combat experience. Luftwaffe tactics had relied on surprise, speed, and concentrated attacks. But against this aerial fortress, surprise was meaningless. Speed offered little advantage. Concentration only funneled attackers into overlapping fields of fire. During one particularly tense maneuver, a simulated attack from below brought the B-17 into a defensive configuration that highlighted the sheer coordination of its guns. Tracers zipped past the cockpit, and even seasoned officers felt the visceral tension of bullets cutting through the air around them. The flying fortress was alive, a machine of steel and firepower that seemed to anticipate every move. By the end of the day, the officers gathered in the briefing room, faces pale but minds sharp with realization. The consensus was unanimous. Attacking this aircraft in formation would be near suicidal. They had flown a captured B-17, tested its systems, and yet the experience left them humbled, shaken, and profoundly aware of their own limitations. Keller's final note in the flight log summed up the day succinctly. We have encountered a machine whose defensive firepower we have never seen. To engage it without significant innovation or overwhelming numbers would be folly. The sky has changed, and we must change with it. The German officers now understood the chilling reality. The B-17 was not just another bomber. It was a fortress in the air, a revelation that would force a strategic rethink for every Luftwaffe pilot. The war in the skies had entered a new, deadly Phase 1 in which firepower, coordination, and resilience could no longer be underestimated. Back on solid ground, the Luftwaffe officers gathered in the briefing room, the weight of their recent flights pressing on their minds. The captured B-17 sat outside, gleaming in the sunlight, deceptively calm after the chaos of the skies. Yet, inside that metal frame, they had witnessed a level of defensive power that none of them had imagined possible. Oberleutnant Keller took the floor, addressing his peers with a mixture of pride and caution. "We have flown the flying fortress," he began, voice steady, "and I will admit, we have never seen defensive firepower like it. Every turret, every angle, every machine gun, it is coordinated, overlapping, relentless. There is no vulnerability that is not covered." The officers murmured in agreement, each recalling the harrowing moments when even a simulation attack had felt perilously real. Diagrams of turret fields were projected on the wall, showing the near total coverage and the interlocking zones that made any approach deadly. OB or Leutnant Weber, younger but equally astute, added, "We must rethink our tactics entirely. Formation. Attacks, head-on dives, even concentrated numbers may be insufficient. Against this machine, we are outmatched in terms of defensive fire." The engineers who had assisted with the flight explained the mechanical precision behind each turret. Remote controls, synchronized firing arcs, and the stability of the airframe allowed gunners to maintain accuracy even under evasive maneuvers. Every aspect of the design was intentional, a testament to the American commitment to protecting their crews. A sense of humility spread through the room. These were skilled pilots, trained for years to dominate the skies, yet they were confronted with a machine that challenged every assumption they had held. The B-17 was not merely a bomber. It was a paradigm shift in aerial warfare. Keller leaned over a diagram showing defensive coverage. "We have learned something vital today," he said, voice low. "This is not a plane to attack lightly. Any mission against a formation of these aircraft must be planned with care, precision, and overwhelming force. Otherwise, we risk annihilation." The officers recorded their observations meticulously, aware that their reports would influence future Luftwaffe strategy. There was admiration in their analysis, but also unease. The flying fortress represented not only superior technology, but a psychological advantage. The confidence of the Americans, the knowledge that they could defend themselves with terrifying efficiency, weighed heavily on the German pilot's dot as the officers dispersed. Each man carried the same thought. They had glimpsed a level of defensive capability that challenged everything they knew. The B-17 had turned the air war into a new kind of battlefield, one where courage alone would not suffice, and where the sky itself had become a fortress. Over the following weeks, the Luftwaffe officers conducted a series of test flights with the captured B-17. Each flight pushed the aircraft and their understanding of its defensive capabilities to the limit. From dawn until dusk, the flying fortress became both a classroom and a battlefield, revealing new lessons with every maneuver. The officers rotated through the cockpit and turrets, each man gaining first-hand experience of the interlocking fields of fire. The tail turret, with its twin .50 caliber guns, could cover approaches from behind with deadly accuracy. The dorsal turret protected the upper rear quadrants, while the waist gunners provided flanking coverage. Even the chin turret, often overlooked, proved devastating against frontal assaults. Oberleutnant Keller marveled at the precision and coordination. "It's as if the aircraft anticipates where the enemy will be," he muttered, running his fingers over the firing controls. Every gun covers another, overlapping perfectly. It's terrifying. Simulated attacks were flown using small German trainers, and every approach ended with the same lesson. The B-17 could protect itself against multiple attackers simultaneously. The officers quickly learned that coordination between gunners was nearly flawless. Even a single mistake could lead to an attacker being shredded by overlapping fire. The psychological impact on the Luftwaffe crew was profound, even in controlled exercises. The tension was palpable. Every maneuver had to be precise, every turn calculated, because the Flying Fortress would exploit any lapse in judgment. The officers came to understand that these bombers were designed not just for offense, but for survival of fortress in the sky that demanded respect. As the weeks passed, they compiled detailed reports, optimal attack angles, the limitations of defensive arcs, and observations of the aircraft's maneuverability. These reports would later inform Luftwaffe strategy, but the underlying truth remained. The B-17's defensive firepower had fundamentally changed the air war. By the end of the series of flights, even the most confident pilots admitted it openly. "We underestimated them," Keller said quietly, addressing the assembled officers. "We have never faced anything like this. The Flying Fortress is not just a bomber. It is a flying fortress in every sense of the word." The captured B-17 had taught them a lesson no classroom or briefing could. It had demonstrated the lethal combination of durability, firepower, and tactical ingenuity that would define Allied bombing campaigns for the remainder of the war. The Luftwaffe officers left each flight humbled, aware that the challenge of confronting the Flying Fortress was far greater than they had imagined. By the spring of 1943, the captured B-17 had completed its series of test flights, leaving the Luftwaffe officers with a stark understanding. The Flying Fortress was more than just a bomber. It was a paradigm shift in aerial warfare, a machine that forced even experienced German pilots to reconsider their approach to combat. Oberleutnant Keller addressed a briefing of senior officers. "We have witnessed something extraordinary," he began, voice steady but filled with gravity. "Every defensive position, every turret, every overlapping field of fire. It is unlike anything we have encountered. To engage these aircraft directly is to invite disaster." The room was silent, the weight of realization sinking in. They had always prided themselves on tactical skill, formation flying, and aggressive assault strategies. Yet the Flying Fortress rendered many of these advantages irrelevant. Its design combined durability, extensive defensive firepower, and coordinated gunnery, making it nearly impervious to conventional Luftwaffe attacks. The reports went beyond technical observations. They conveyed the psychological impact on pilots. Even trained veterans felt a new level of apprehension when facing these bombers. Confidence was replaced by caution, and strategies that had worked against lesser aircraft now appeared reckless. Historically, these revelations had long-term implications. The Luftwaffe had to adapt, developing new tactics such as head-on attacks with multiple fighters, massed formations, and coordinated strikes to overwhelm the B-17's defenses. Despite these adjustments, the lessons learned from the captured aircraft underscored the difficulty of confronting the Flying Fortress without incurring severe losses. For the officers who had flown the captured B-17, the experience was unforgettable. They had seen firsthand the scale of American industrial innovation and the effectiveness of defensive firepower. The Flying Fortress was not merely a weapon, It was a statement of strategy, endurance, and ingenuity even after the war. Accounts of these flights circulated among historians and former pilots. The captured B-17 became a symbol of the technological and tactical challenges faced by the Luftwaffe, demonstrating that dominance in the air required more than skill. It required innovation, anticipation, and respect for the capabilities of one's enemy. As Keller later reflected, "We believed we were the hunters in the sky. But in that moment, flying the Flying Fortress, we became the students of a new kind of warfare. Its power was absolute, its design flawless, and its lesson clear. Underestimating it would be fatal." The Flying Fortress had changed the skies over Europe. It had forced a re-evaluation of strategy, inspired innovation, and left a lasting mark on the pilots who dared to confront it. For the Luftwaffe officers, it was a revelation that would echo through every mission, every planning session, and every encounter with American air power for the remainder of the war. The captured B-17 remained under careful study at the Luftwaffe test facilities, a prized artifact of both technological achievement and strategic insight. Engineers and officers alike analyzed every component, every gun turret, and every section of reinforced fuselage. The lessons it provided were invaluable, but also sobering. Oberleutnant Keller and his colleagues continued to fly the aircraft in controlled conditions, testing its capabilities and limitations. Each flight reinforced what they already knew. The Flying Fortress was nearly indestructible to conventional Luftwaffe tactics, and its defensive firepower demanded respect. Reports from these test flights circulated to German Air Command, prompting urgent discussions about how to counter this formidable opponent. Strategies were revised, attack formations adjusted, and more aggressive coordination planned, but the psychological impact remained. Pilots who had flown the B-17 knew firsthand that underestimating it could be fatal. Beyond immediate tactical lessons, the captured B-17 influenced aircraft design discussions in Germany. Engineers scrutinized its durability, gun placements, and defensive systems, drawing inspiration for future projects. Yet they could not replicate the full combination of firepower, redundancy, and operational coordination that made the Flying Fortress legendary. The legacy of the Flying Fortress extended beyond technical analysis. It became a symbol of industrial ingenuity and resilience, demonstrating how a well-designed defensive system could transform the battlefield. The Luftwaffe officers who had flown it carried a newfound respect for their adversary, a recognition that aerial supremacy depended as much on innovation as on skill. In the years that followed, veterans recalled the experience with awe and humility. Flying it was unlike anything else. Keller once said in a post-war interview, "Every maneuver, every turret, every angle. It taught us that power in the air is not just about offense, but about survival, coordination, and vision. We had never seen anything like it, and we never will again." The Flying Fortress had changed the air war, reshaping tactics, instilling caution, and leaving a lasting impression on those who faced it. Its story was not merely about a captured plane, but about the profound lesson it taught. In war, true strength lies not only in courage or numbers, but in the ingenuity, foresight, and determination to protect one's own, while challenging the enemy in ways they had never anticipated. For the Luftwaffe officers, the Flying Fortress remained unforgettable, a machine that had both humbled and educated them, leaving a legacy that would echo in the skies long after the war had ended. The skies had shifted, strategies had evolved, and the captured B-17 stood as a monument to a lesson they would carry for life: respect the power of innovation or risk annihilation.